Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Talking Feds one-on-one. First one that we have actually had about the grotesque and tragic death of murder of Alexi Navalny. And we're here with Max Boot, as good a person as there is to sort of give us the lay of the land and the implications. Max is the Jean J. Kirkpatrick Senior Fellow for National Security Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's a columnist for the Washington Post. He's got a new biography of Ronald Reagan, His Life and Legend, to be released in September 2024. Max, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I mainly wanted to focus on political implications going forward, but I just can't elide over the actual circumstances of the death and how barbaric and inhumane it was. Do you have a sense, was this just, they just put him up there in the gulag in wretched conditions, kind of thinking he'll die at some point, or was this really a sort of slow, torturous murder that was ordered by Putin from the beginning?
I'm not sure we are actually ever going to know what exactly happened. And clearly, the Russian authorities went to some troubles to obfuscate the conditions of his death. They waited quite a long time to release his body to his family. And you can't trust any kind of autopsy that's done under Russian control. So we don't know if Putin actually ordered his murder or whether this was a byproduct of the inhumane and cruel conditions under which he was held with these sham charges in this Arctic penal colony. Either way, we know that Putin is 100% culpable for his death. It's an outrage, it's a tragedy, and it's an attempt by Putin to end all opposition to his odious regime. Whether it succeeds or not, I think remains to be seen.
All right, so let me pick up there because he really was the dominant figure in the opposition. It's unclear what remains in his wake, whether the opposition movement can, if not just thrive, at least survive in his absence. Do you have a sense now of what is next for what the vestiges that remain of the Russian opposition movement?
It's obviously very difficult because Putin has tightened down on his police state controls considerably since the beginning of the Ukraine war, and many opponents of his regime have understandably fled the country. But even after Navalny's death, there were still thousands of very brave people who turned out to mourn his passing. And
some of whom have been arrested just for just for turning up, right?
Exactly. And they knew that that's what would happen, but they came out anyway, which shows that you can't entirely extinguish the spark of freedom, which is something that Navalny gave his life for. So I don't think anybody should conclude that there's going to be any kind of popular movement to overthrow Putin anytime soon. But at the same time, I don't think we should go to the other extreme and assume that Putin or some successor dictator is destined to rule Russia for all time, because I think there is a lot of discontent under the surface that Navalny tapped into. And I think in death, he may ultimately do a lot of damage to Putin because, he died a brave man, a principled man, somebody who was willing to die for his beliefs. He was always, even in life, he was much more charismatic, much funnier, much more of a popular figure than Putin could ever hope to be. But in life, he has become a legend. And that's something that, there's nothing that Putin can do to dispel that legend. And I think the story of Navalny, so, and remember that he voluntarily went back to Russia after Putin had nearly killed him with a nerve weapon. Just one of the bravest, most courageous things I think anybody has ever done. And of course, he knew what the likely outcome was, and we saw what happened. But the fact that he was willing to do that and his belief in freedom in Russia was that great, I think will continue to inspire Russians through the generations. And in the long run, I'm convinced he's going to be a hero of Russian history at a time when Putin will be reviled.
I mean, it is a story that just naturally kind of grows in grandeur and adulation. Though, let me push back a little because I was surprised in preparing to speak to you today to see a poll taken ostensibly by an independent center that said, at least within Russia, something like only 10% spoke approvingly of his activities. This is after his death. Only 20% had a positive opinion of the people who were showing up on the demonstration. So the majority seems indifferent to hostile. Do you think that's a accurate snapshot? And I mean, how could the majority of Russia be literally so opposed to someone who's no matter what seems heroic?
Well, imagine that you live in a police state like Russia, where you know that anybody who opposes Putin or opposes his brutal war in Ukraine is likely to go to jail. And imagine that a stranger calls you up and says, "Hey, what do you think about Putin? And what do you think about Putin's chief opponent, Alexei Navalny?" How many people are going to be brave enough or dumb enough to say, "I support Navalny"? I mean,
All
that's
right,
an
so you don't give credence to the actual results here, but is the short
I
answer.
don't think you can have accurate polling in a dictatorship like Russia. But I think what is really telling is that when Navalny tried to run against Putin for the presidency, Putin disqualified him. And Putin has disqualified a bunch of other challengers this year in anticipation of his forthcoming quote unquote election. Because even though these polls show that Putin is supposedly so popular, he certainly controls all the propaganda organs, he controls the police state. Despite that, it feels like a very fragile dictatorship, or at least Putin thinks so, because he's not willing to test himself at the polls in a free and honest election. He disqualifies anybody who has any kind of popularity, because I think he's afraid of what would happen if he allowed a Navalny or one of the other opposition politicians onto the ballot. I think a lot of people, if there was truly a free and fair election with secret balloting, an awful lot of people would vote against Putin. At least that's what he's afraid of.
Yeah. All right, let's zero in for a second on the war with Ukraine. He initially, this is Navalny, didn't condemn the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, but he was an opponent of Ukraine. He last year called for Ukraine to return to its 1991 borders, so the return of Crimea. How do you see his death influencing, if at all, the prosecution of the Russia-Ukrainian war for Putin?
I don't think his death is going to have much of an impact on the war one way or the other. I mean, it's part of a pattern of Putin dispatching anybody who could challenge him. Last year, Putin murdered Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, the mercenaries who staged a mutiny against them. Now he's basically murdered Navalny, and he's gotten, has turned the screws and cracked down on all opposition so that he can continue this genocidal war against Ukraine. In terms of Navalny's own views, I mean, there's some controversy in Ukraine because a lot of Ukrainians kind of view him as a Russian nationalist, and were not supporters of Navalny. And I think it's certainly true that in the past, for example, in 2014, Navalny was supportive of Putin's annexation of Crimea, which in the past had been part of Russia. But in recent years, as you noted, he came around to a different position, which was demanding that Ukraine go back to its 1991 borders, which would mean the end of all Russian occupation. And so, that's a hard position for Russians to take, but it's one that he took. And I think I think there's going to be a surprising amount of sympathy in Russia with that position, which you're not going to hear in public, because Putin has made clear that anybody who thinks that he should end the war is going to wind up in the gulag.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know this much better, but he aspired to be the leader of Russia, and having that aspiration, the ability to really push back on at least some of the expansionist policies of Putin were a strategic choice, if nothing else. All right, Max, you gave us a glimmer of hope. You said, look, we're kind of maxed out on sanctions. True, the Russian economy is hurting, but they're being kept afloat by oil sales to China and India and Turkey, I guess. But you said two things that remain now to get Putin's attention. Can you elaborate?
Well, I think there's two principal things that we in the West can do to hurt Russia and to make Putin think twice about his invasion of Ukraine. The first and most important thing is the House needs to get its act together and pass the $60 billion aid bill for Ukraine, which was already passed with 70 votes in the Senate. It is just criminal that the House is sitting on this. Speaker Mike Johnson is not allowing the bill to the floor because he knows it would probably pass. And the Ukrainians, as we speak, are running out of ammunition. They've already lost the town of Avdiivka. They could lose more towns. You could see more Russian breakthroughs with the Russian war machine preparing for a spring-summer offensive. So it is imperative that we get them the support and ammunition they need to hold the lines. And that's why you need to have the $60 billion aid bill pass. But the other thing that we can do is actually to use Russia's own money against the Russian war effort, because there is 300 billion in frozen Russian assets in the West, most of it in a clearinghouse in Belgium. There is no reason in the world why we can't send all of that money to Ukraine tomorrow. And that would be a major blow to Russia. It would be a major infusion of cash into Ukraine. It would make Putin think, well, maybe I'm not going to win this war after all. Maybe my enemies have more resources than I have. And I think, I just have no patience for the dilly-dallying about sending the money to Ukraine. Larry Tribe, as you know, one of our most eminent constitutional scholars, wrote a 100-page treatise on why this is fully within the law to do that, and why it's imperative to do that. And yet the Biden administration and our European allies continue to drag their feet. I think we gotta get our act together and show that we're serious about stopping Putin's war of aggression and making Putin pay quite literally for his crimes.
I mean, it's a hardball play, but man, it's if not now, when it seems so condign, as you say. Though I hasten to add, I don't think it's just Biden and European allies. Maybe we can close out here. What the hell? It's a multi-pronged question, but let's zero in on the Putin Russia part of it. It does seem like almost a platform entry on the MAGA now, which is now the Republican Party platform, is affection, sympathy, respect, at least absence of hostility for Putin, coming from the now clear standard bearer for the party, Donald Trump. How did this happen? Can it change? How damaging is it? What the hell?
These are all great questions, which I grapple with in my next Washington Post column. Bottom line is, Donald Trump has long been very sympathetic to Putin and to Russia. And along with that, he's also been very hostile to Ukraine, because he has basically imbibed this Russian viewpoint that Ukraine is not a real country. It's really a part of Russia. And he's been surrounded by, a lot of wealthy Russians in South Florida. He's done business with a lot of them. He's also had a number of Russian agents in close proximity to his campaign. And he just admires Putin and listens to what Putin tells him. And of course, this is what, Putin tells him. But it's truly shocking for me to see the way that Trump has transformed the Republican Party. And I say that as a former Republican, grew up in the 1980s, the period I write about in my biography of Ronald Reagan, when Reagan was calling the Soviet Union the evil empire. And to go from that to this Republican Party, where you have a substantial element which is pro-Russian, pro-Putin, it is just shocking, the fact that so many Republicans are so willing to abandon our democratic allies in Ukraine to the Putin war machine. This is really a moral and strategic bankruptcy, which threatens not only the future of Ukraine, but the future of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, there are many near existential, I don't know if I'd go that far on this one, but I mean, hugely important stakes in the upcoming election. This is surely one of them. Max, did you say you're writing a column on this? And do you have a sense of when it will run in the Washington Post?
It should be out on Monday.
Great. So everyone look for that and all of Max's work, which is really indispensable for following this incredibly important area of the world. Thanks as always for being with us, and hope to speak with you soon.
Thanks again for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.